Hello all, Old Geek here, and today I'm going to be talking about ability scores. Those 6 statistics that help define your character's capabilities, both physical and mental. And in those halcyon days before the first digit of the year flipped to a 2, defined what your character could and could not be, with several classes being nigh on unachievable. Let's start this video with a flick through the main methods of stat generation. Life began simply. You rolled 3d6, 6 times in order. And that was that. This method of course remained the default in Basic and BECME. But things changed with the release of the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide in 1979. Yes, in AD&D the methods for stat generation were in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The Player's Handbook had been released in 1978, so one can only assume that during the interim, players were expected to continue using the method defined in OD&D and Holmes Basic. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, the DM was to choose which method would be used of the 4 that were listed. I already made a video describing those in detail, which I'll link below. There was no specific default method, but it's fair to say that method 1 became dominant. 4d6, drop the lowest, and rearrange as you wish. I discovered basic D&D in 1983 and AD&D in 1984, and this was the method we used when playing the latter. It was listed first, therefore it must be the norm, right? The thing is, it worked. It gave the player some flexibility, but those aspirational classes, the ones that needed a variety of high ability scores, remained relatively rare. With 4 15s, a 12 and a 10 needed, along with a torturous qualification process, the bard remained elusive, as did the monk, which also demanded several 15s. I saw an article once which explained the odds of rolling stats that qualified for each class. And even with the 4d6 method, your odds of qualifying for the Bard class were around 1%. Or maybe even slightly lower, if I remember correctly. But I've not been able to find the article. The website appears to have long gone. I do know, however, that if you rolled 3d6 in order, your chance is 0.0017%. Minuscule. About as likely as one of us marrying Susanna Hoffs. Famously, paladins needed 17 charisma, and the 4d6 method made this quite achievable. But the pain of having to put that one shiny 17 or 18 in charisma was palpable. The paladin class was all about making sacrifices. And so looking back, this was right. Unless of course your DM used charisma correctly. But few did. But what if you rolled really badly and all your mates rolled really well? Never fear, Gygax to the rescue. In a passage in the Dungeon Master's Guide, he criticises the 3d6 method, and on page 9 of the Player's Handbook he hints that 2 scores of 15 or more are recommended. Thus, we can draw from that Gygax was not averse to allowing players to re-roll poor stats, and that minimum stat requirements for each class force players to re-roll if they have 2 stats of 5 or lower. So it wasn't a death sentence to have 2 low stats. You could roll again if they were low enough. Okay, this intro is starting to ramble. So when, in my opinion, did AD&D jump the shark? 4d6 rearrange was tried and tested. It worked. It generally led to variety, it was flexible, many parties would have maybe 1 or 2 of the rarer character classes among them, but most PCs would be viable and would be of the core 4 classes: Fighter, Cleric, Magic User and Thief. In 1985, Unearthed Arcana was published. A book stuffed with new options, a book that divides opinion, a book that this, then teenager, snapped up greedily. And I used it. I added all the stuff because I didn't know any better. In the DM section of Unearthed Arcana, on page 74 there was a new method for generating ability scores. Method 5, only available for human PCs. The player would now choose their class first, roll a set number of dice for each stat, and pick the 3 highest. But never fear. If you still failed to reach the requirement, you could just bump that stat up to the minimum. Non-human PCs would still be required to use the traditional Dungeon Master's Guide methods though. Thus, your chance of getting a monk jumped from somewhere around 2% to 100%. Bards weren't on the list, but they were an optional class anyway. However, their mantle of toughest class to qualify for had now been stolen by the new Paladin, now a subclass of Cavalier, loads of 15s and a 17, even more insane stat requirements. Never mind though, Method 5 made your chance of being one, if you so chose, 100%. And thus, in my games anyway, the trusty fighter made way for hordes of barbarians, or paladins, or rangers. The magic of those rarer classes disappeared in the blink of an eye. More mature or experienced gamers would have seen through this, but in my youthful enthusiasm, I did not. I am being somewhat hyperbolic, of course, but looking back, this was, in my opinion, a seriously misplaced step. It had the potential to destroy the balance of the traditional AD&D party, and so, in that sense, it was apt that it was included in Unearthed Arcana, a book that should have contained the warning, for experienced DMs only. Hopefully this video will prompt discussion in the comments below. It is, of course, intended to. Until next time, I've been the Old Geek. See ya.